Hello, everybody. This is Wesley Cable from the Obsessed with Wine podcast, and it is a special matinee edition of the podcast today. It's 1 o'clock instead of our usual 6:30 time, but I'm really excited to talk to Laura Barrett. She is the winemaker at Clif Family Winery, and I really am excited to talk to her. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in and bring Laura in so we could start talking. So there you are, Laura. How are you?
Hello. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I'm excited to talk to you about this. You probably don't know this, but St. Helena is my favorite place to go in the world. So you're lucky you get to work there every single day. And when I did a couple harvests, I did them in St. Helena, and I just fell in love with it. So you're lucky. I feel like you got the best job in the world. I'm sure you feel the same way.
I do feel the same way. I'm lucky to both live and work in this town. It's a great little community surrounded by amazing wineries and amazing restaurants and a great local crew. So, yeah, we're happy here.
So just to get started, then I just want to start with one thing. So when I heard about Clif Family Winery, I didn't make the connection between the Clif Bar and the Clif Winery. I mean, I don't think it's that easy of a connection to make. Maybe it is for some people, but I didn't make that connection. So when I found out that they were related, then that was interesting to me. So just starting off, can you just tell us a little bit about the family and the story behind the winery?
Sure. Yeah, so our owners are Kit Crawford and Gary Erickson. They are an amazing couple. And they started Clif Bar in the early 90s and became obviously a very wildly successful business making energy
Yeah.
bars, and moved on to other kind of energy food products. And that business was based out of the East Bay, kind of San Francisco area in Emeryville. And when the business took off, they decided to move to St. Helena and raise their family, and they bought a property up on Howell Mountain. Kit and Gary are into mountain biking and gardening, and they had a family up on the hill. So they kind of put their roots in the ground for family here in St. Helena. And then a few years later, in 2004, decided to start a winery. And they founded Clif Family Winery in 2004. And it was a different business back then. I think it was a bigger winery. They had a larger production and kind of these two wines that they called the Climber. The Climber White, the Climber Red, and they were distributing them nationally. And to them, that felt a little like their wines were being distributed across the country, and they felt a little disconnected to the customer that was consuming their wine and the people that were selling their wine. So they made the decision, I think it was around 2011, 2012, to bring the business a little closer to home, at which point we opened up our tasting room right here on Main Street in downtown St. Helena. And that became kind of the beginning of phase 2 of Clif Family Winery. And we started making smaller lots, more direct to consumer sales, and really the foundation of the hospitality hub that we have today here on the property.
So my next question to you is, can you still get Clif Family out there, or do you have to get them at the winery right now? Is that the only place to get them?
So most of our sales up until now have been direct from the winery, with a little bit of kind of what you would call distribution in the Napa Valley and this local area. But most recently, so we purchased a new vineyard in 2018, and we really grew our estate wine program. So our grape sourcing is we have much more opportunity to make wine. And so we have just started this year selling wine a little in very select markets across the country. So you can find our wine in Idaho. And the reason for Idaho is that Clif Bar has a bakery there. So the neighboring restaurants really wanted our wine. You can also find our wine all over Northern California and in North Carolina. So we have some distribution. We're starting to branch back out into that marketplace, but in a very strategic way, in places where we know it's a great fit for our brand. So it's been a nice transition for us, and we're still in the very early phases of that. So the best guarantee, if you're living across the country and you want to find our wine, it's unlikely that you're going to go to your neighborhood store and pick up a bottle. The best place is to, of course, go on our website and buy it from cliffamily.com.
So as it relates to that, from a winery perspective, is that better for the winery to have it just available or mostly available just there at the winery, or is it better to have it distributed all over, or is it just personal preference, I guess, based on the owner of the company?
Yeah, it really depends on the brand. It depends on what style of wine you're making, how large your SKUs are, how much wine, because you can imagine if you're really small, a distributor might not want to take on your wine if there's not enough to push out into the marketplace, or so it's really about fit for the style of wine that you're making to that specific location, as well as the size of your winery. It's a different sales model. So for us, when we were mainly direct to consumer, we have a robust staff in-house to sell our wine here. And of course, we have a large e-commerce program as well as a wonderful wine club. And so there's just different strategies, and our people are here instead of us hiring people across the country through the distribution network to sell wine. So there's no right or wrong way. I think it really fits the profile of the business and the size and the products that you're making.
So originally, when the founders came to Napa, their plan was not to start a winery and grow grapes, right? That was something that just came eventually down the road, right? And what got them into doing that?
Correct. Well, they are such innovators. They have amazing minds for innovation and being an entrepreneur and building business. They're just really amazing people. So I think just the proximity and the involvement and their appreciation for wine, but most importantly, they are avid travelers and avid cyclists, and so they found themselves biking through these huge mountain passes in Italy, and then they would finish their day in the village with a beautiful meal and a nice bottle of wine. And for them, that was the true inspiration and where they found their appreciation for wine. And they really wanted to recreate that experience here in the Napa Valley, and which is exactly what we've done. We have this amazing tasting room where people can go ride their bikes for the day. And they don't, of course, you don't have to be a cyclist to appreciate Clif Family Winery, but it is exactly that environment that we've recreated here, where they can enjoy their day, whether it's something active or strolling the streets or other wine tasting, and then come to our tasting room and have a delicious glass or bottle of wine or a flight of wines. And we always have a food component. That was something they were really passionate about. So we have what we call the Clif Family Bruschetteria, which is a green food truck parked outside of the tasting room that makes gourmet bruschetta, lots of delicious sides and salads. And the majority of the ingredients from those foods come from our organic farm up on Howell Mountain. So it's very much a wine, food, farming trio that we have to offer here. And it's a community hub. So they've created a space that I think was their ultimate vision. And it's a really fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. So Gary and Kit, what do they like to work for? I mean, all I know about them is what I read, and they seem like you were saying, they're crazy about being outdoors and doing outdoor type stuff. But what do they like to actually work for?
They are incredible people, and they bring so much energy and passion and enthusiasm for their values. And their values are all around sustainability. So they have what they call their 5 aspirations. And this was a model that they built when they were developing Clif Bar. And their 5 aspirations are all based off of sustainability, and it's sustaining our business, our brand, our community, our people, and our planet. So that's always the focus of what we're doing. And they bring that concept and those ideas into the winery. And it really helps us make all kinds of decisions. So when you're struggling with a decision, whether it be in hospitality, in guest services, or for me in the vineyard or in the winery, when you really think under the framework of those 5 aspirations, it makes it really easy to make your decisions and to know that you're making a decision that Kit and Gary would support when they're not present. So they take amazing care of us as people. We all feel really valued, and we all love our jobs and want to be here. And many of us have been here for more than a decade now. So there's that. But then I think it also, for me, has shaped kind of the person that I am, where when you think about sustainability and organic farming and the choices that you make in your personal life, it really infiltrates into your own decision making outside of work, which I think is a really powerful example of the influence that they have on us as people working for them, and also just how we are in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, sustainability was the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. So here's what I noticed. I noticed that you'll hear a lot of people talk about sustainability and the things that they're doing, to be green and all that stuff. But it really is, just from looking at everything Clif Family is all about, it really is something that they put into everything that they do in the winery, whether it be from, like you said, the foods that's grown there, what you guys do in the winery, but the packaging and all that stuff. It is a huge part of what Clif Family is all about.
Absolutely. I can't go much further without bragging that we just got our B Corp certification. So for anyone who doesn't know about B Corp, it's a company.
I don't know what that is. So
yeah, it's a company called B Labs, and it's a private organization that has developed this very, very, very detailed certification on sustainability, and it goes deeper than just organic farming. I mean, we're certified organic, and we have been for many, many years. It goes much for, not to dismiss that, it's a very important part of what we do. But B Corp certification talks about business in general. So it's global. It's a global program. There are B Corp certified businesses all over the world. And it's not specific to the wine business. It's any business. And they dive deep into your practices. So whether it's how you're using water, or how you're educating your employees on diversity and inclusion and equity, or how you're managing waste in your kitchen, they really dive deep into everything. And there are, I think, we're just learning these facts, but I think there are about 6,000 companies globally that are B Corp certified. And in the wine business, in the Napa Valley, we are the third. So it's something that we're super proud of, and this just happened about a month ago. So we're still kind of high on the energy from it. Anyway, that's an amazing thing, and that is an example of really how elevated we are when it comes to our practices and our efforts in sustainability.
So I'm going to ask you a question. So I was going to ask you about the B certification because I wasn't sure what that was all about, but I know it was important, and you guys, it was well represented on the website and everything. So I wanted to ask you about that. But as far as sustainability is concerned, is that something you hear wherever you go? When I go wine tasting in Napa, I hear that everywhere, right? Is that something that's I don't want to say new, but are more people paying attention to it now than they ever did before? Or are we just learning about it more than we did before?
No, I think people are taking it more seriously now. I feel like when I started in the industry, there was like organic farming over here and sustainability over here. So if you weren't organic, you would say, oh, well, we're sustainable. And the definition of sustainable was a little loose back in the day. It meant that you might plant, cover crops, or, there were important steps to get to that sustainability level, but it wasn't a proper certification. So it was just, the term was used a little more loosely. And then if you really were really achieving, true sustainable and organic farming practices, you were going for CCOF certification. But now I really think that the focus on sustainability has become much more important in business minds. People are really talking about it and thinking about it, and the term sustainability has become much more valuable. I think people are
Mhm.
using livestock and sheep in the vineyard in the spring to do that first mowing pass before bud break. Things like that you see is so much more common. People are talking about it. People are applying for these awards and certifications. And I think it's really changed for the better in the last decade.
Well, and it's obvious that it's important to you and to other, the wineries out there. But I think it's also something that the customers want. I mean, they want to see that out of whoever they're doing business with. Is that right? Are you guys finding that too? It's something that the customers are asking for, or at least want to see.
Definitely. I think people are asking for it. I think people are in tune with what it means to make wine from organic grapes. It's becoming more and more important. It's becoming a call out where there might be, a section in the wine shop that is wine from organic grapes, or it's called out on the back label. We can now put it like in an ingredient statement. So it's becoming more of a talking point and something that is discussed more. And then once it's talked about more, I think then people are going to seek it out more. So it takes time and it's a progression. But we feel good about doing that work. And being kind of a leader in the industry and getting it out there and talking about it. And I mean, that's one of the main things is a lot of people are doing all this work, but they're just not talking about it. And then it's not in the forefront of people's minds if they're not hearing it. So I think all of these things, it's been a nice progression where people are doing a lot of work, but now we're really doing a lot more people are doing it and a lot more people are talking about it. There are climate action conferences and things that we're using in the vineyard now that promote sustainability and biodiversity. And there's just a lot more we can think about and we can use in our farming practices to take it to the next level. So it feels like a really good effort and a great project to be involved in.
So I want to go into talk a little bit about you now, Laura. So as far as your wine journey, okay, so how did you end up finding wine, and was there this aha moment that a lot of winemakers talk about, or this was the time when I knew it was for me or something? So how did that all work out for you?
Yeah, so my story is kind of starts about midway through college when I was a science major and I got about halfway through my degree and decided that I had this fear that I was going to work in a basement lab for a pharmaceutical company for the rest of my life and never see the light of day. So I decided I really needed to shift gears and get serious about what did I want to do with my career in my degree in science. And so I discovered fermentation science, and the whole idea of making a product was really interesting to me. I think I thought maybe I would play around in coffee. I would think about beer or wine, or like what kind of career path could I take where I was using my science degree to make some kind of product. And I discovered the master's program and the graduate degree at the University of California in Davis. And that was really intriguing to me to stay on the academic path and get a master's degree in fermentation science. So I'm originally from the East Coast, from Massachusetts, the Boston area, and I drove across the country and moved to the Napa Valley. And my first harvest was at the Napa Wine Company, which is a custom crush facility where I got to see hundreds and hundreds of lots of wine come into the winery during a harvest and meet many different winemakers. It was a really great introduction to the valley and to the people and winemakers of the valley. So I did that before I went to Davis. And then I did my 2-year graduate program. And then after that, I got my first job in 2003. And I ended up at Fisher Vineyards, and they have a winery on Spring Mountain on the Sonoma side, and also vineyards on the valley floor in Calistoga. So I had wanted to work for a female winemaker. So I had kind of sought out the most reputable female winemakers that I knew or could think of at the time or had read about. And Mia Klein was one of them. She was the consulting winemaker at Fisher. And so she connected me with Whitney Fisher, who's the winemaker, and I was there for 5 years. And then in 2008, moved on to my first full-time winemaking or head winemaking position for a brand called KC Flat Ranch, and worked there for about 7 years, and then landed at Clif Family in November of 2014.
So I have a question going back to your education. So I've met a lot of people who've gone to Davis and get their degrees. Why the master's degree? And was that just something you always wanted to do? Or, what was the thought about that? Because I think just for me, like, I don't meet a lot of people who've gone that far with it. So how does that go? And what went into making that decision?
Yeah, so before I made that decision, I was traveling. When I got out of college, I decided I would kind of dabble in some of these ideas. And I went to Australia and eventually ended up in New Zealand working a harvest, my first harvest. And literally, we were picking grapes. It wasn't high-tech cellar work or anything. I was literally picking grapes as a traveler in New Zealand. And I very much got hooked there. If there was like an aha moment, I don't have an aha wine that I drank that made me want to get into the business. It was really an experience where I was in the vineyard, in a beautiful place, surrounded by really friendly, fun people, and the wine lifestyle was very intriguing to me. And I had finished my undergraduate degree in chemistry and knew that I needed to find a program where I could learn a specialty in what I wanted to do. So, I suppose there's a lot of people at that point in their decision making in their career that would just come into the business and work and get work experience. And that's one great path and great way to do it. I felt comfortable in the academic world. It was what I had been doing. And so I think for confidence, I kind of took the academic path first. I did work that one harvest in New Zealand and then one harvest at the Napa Wine Company before I started my program. But I definitely wanted to fulfill that kind of interest that I had in fermentation science, because I always wanted to just understand what was happening. So, during fermentation, what exactly is happening? So for me, it was really interest in the science that led me down that path. I don't necessarily think that it's not 100% necessary to have a degree in fermentation science or viticulture and enology to be a winemaker. There are hundreds of, there are many, many winemakers, a large percentage that learn through work experience and have other degrees and have had other careers for that matter. So there's many paths to get there. My path was definitely the academic route. And I think that when I talk about whether it's necessary or not, I always tell people that I use it most when I have problems, especially now in this, when we're dealing with other issues in the winemaking world that we aren't so familiar with, like smoke taint and the smoke influence of wine or in wine. And so when there are troubles, I feel like my science background really helps me and helps me understand what's going on, or leads me down the path where I can ask the right questions to figure out what's going on. But it's not necessary in the art of winemaking.
So I had a winemaker tell me one time, he said, I would never hire a winemaker who didn't have a degree from a college, a winemaking degree, for that same reason you just said, which is it's helpful when things go wrong to have that experience, to know what to do, to know to ask the right questions. So I've heard that before from other people. So, but everybody I talk to who's making wine right now have some kind of science interest. So do you think you have to have that kind of science interest or something like that to be successful? Maybe not, because you just said that people from all walks of life are doing it. So
yeah, well, the work is when you're talking about fermentation, which is when the wines are made, it's a lot of science. You're dealing with yeast and bacteria and fermentation kinetics and temperature, and there's a lot of science. So I think that it intrigues people that come from that sort of that have that mindset, as opposed to someone who might have a philosophy degree. It definitely pulls us in, I think, because it's something where you're crafting something, you're making it, and you need to you kind of need to understand the pathways in order to get there.
So, how did you end up at Clif Family then? So, how, after your experiences, how did you end up there, and why did you choose Clif Family if that's how it happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I had started my family, and I had two little kids. And the story of my, how I stumbled upon Cliff Family is kind of cute. But I was sitting by the pool when my kids were in swim lessons, and the president of our company, Lindsay Gay, her husband, was doing the same thing I was, sitting by the pool with watching the kids during their swim lesson. And we started talking. He's a really easy guy to chat with and tends to make great conversation. And I just and I had started my quiet hunt for a new job, and he just felt like the right person to tell. So it kind of worked out great. I let him know that I was looking for a job, and he said, "Oh, I might know someone who needs a winemaker." So it all came together kind of in a personal way. But I mean, at the time, I was just so interested in this company, and they were doing, they've always been on the forefront of, just great community involvement, a company where you walk by and say, "God, I would love to work there, and I would love to work for those people, and work with those people." And I think it's the same sort of energy that most people feel about the business today is what I felt 8.5 years ago. It was a great position. And so, the other thing that I love about this job is that we have a very diverse wine portfolio. So instead of going to a Napa Valley winery that's making Cabernet and Chardonnay and nothing else, we were making Gewürztraminer and Grenache and Petite Syrah and all these like unique varietals that, if it's going to be, if I'm going to have one job, I would love the diversity in the varietal composition of our portfolio. It was really intriguing to me.
So going back just a second, I was going to ask you, besides, had you had their wines before you had even, met them or anything? Had you had the wines before you were hired?
Oh yeah. I had the wines.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I had, because the tasting room was here, and so I had been in the tasting room and tasted the wines for sure. Yeah. So I knew that their commitment to quality. I had a pretty good understanding of the business, which was really it's an amazing position and a lot of fun. I mean, I get to work with some growers. We have a large percentage of estate vineyards now that are farmed by us, and so we have a lot of obviously 100% control over the farming practices and the organic piece. So it's for a winemaker, it's really a dream situation.
So the next thing I want to talk to you about is the vineyards, but I was going to ask you a question based on something that you just said. So you said that you were kind of softly looking for, your next position. Okay. Mm-hmm. When you're a winemaker somewhere, when is it time to go somewhere else? Because I noticed that, people go from place to place, and for the consumer like myself, maybe we don't understand why that is. So what is it that makes you decide eventually, okay, I know it's time to go somewhere else? Is it just a matter of you've accomplished everything you can at this place?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because in the wine business, as a winemaker, it takes a really long time before your product is out in the marketplace. So, for example, my first red wine at Clif Family was 2015. So then I make that wine vintage 15, but I don't bottle it until 2007, the end of 17, 2 full years later. And then it bottle ages. If it's a Cabernet, it bottle ages for a year. So you're 3 years into your job before you have your first Cabernet release. Then you finally get people to taste it. You get feedback. You're supporting sales staff that are selling your wine. So it's a slow process. So when you've been somewhere for 10 years in the wine business, it's really not that many vintages. It's not that long of a time. Mm-hmm. So for me personally, at that transition, it was the right time because the brand that I was working for before, they were selling their ranch. So it was just a shift in the business in their business that made me decide to look for a new position. But I think other winemakers, there are many winemakers that have been in their positions for 25 years. It's not uncommon to see someone that has a great relationship with the family or the business that they work for. The wines are delicious and they continue to get better and better at what they do every year because you have so much experience under your belt. And every vintage is so different that you're constantly learning and evolving your expertise for that particular site. And so it's not uncommon to see people stay for many years and in fact, their entire career. Which I think is unusual to kind of our industry. It takes a long time to fine tune those details and perfect, and you can always add to it based off of experience, which is so fun.
So is that first vintage coming out of your Cabernet, the first Cabernet, were you nervous? I mean, how did you feel about that first vintage coming out? I mean, obviously you're confident in your abilities, but there had to be some nervousness about, okay, how is this going to be perceived by the outside world, right?
Definitely in the beginning, for sure. That first vintage, especially when you're new to the site, new to the property, and new to the customer base, right? So, this is not about me and my wine and my style. This is about the business. And we have a customer base that's used to drinking a certain style of wine. And, you need to make sure that you're delivering what your customers want to drink as well. So, I think there's definitely some nerves associated with that in the very beginning. But as the years progressed, I've become so confident where, our rosé is an example. We make a large amount of rosé from Grenache red grapes, and our customers love it. And I can go into the cellar when that wine is finished right after harvest and kind of, taste right out of the barrel when the time is right, and just take one sniff from the wine and from the glass and know like, oh, this is awesome. We've done it again. This is exactly what we've grown to know and love about our rosé program. And it's always a really nice experience and a nice moment for me each year to kind of revisit that. And because I have the experience and the confidence in knowing what the customers love and what I can do with each product. So it's definitely evolved over the years, no doubt. I don't have that kind of hesitation anymore.
Yeah. So let's talk about the vineyards. So you mentioned Howell Mountain. So I want to talk about that first. So you guys have 10 acres, I guess it was 10 acres on Howell Mountain that you farm. And so tell me about what are the characteristics of fruit coming from Howell Mountain versus other places? And what are the challenges of growing grapes there and harvesting grapes there?
Yeah, so Howell Mountain is an AVA, which is a vineyard appellation, kind of an area that is classified as unique to the Napa Valley. And Howell Mountain is on the northeast side of the valley. And the elevation is actually kind of the crest of the mountain, so 1,400 foot elevation and higher. And because it's on the east side of the valley, it doesn't have a lot of marine influence. The tagline for the AVA is above the fog. So it almost is always sitting above the fog layer, which doesn't mean that there's not influence from the fog layer. No doubt that cool air from the Napa Valley, if you're sitting right above it, you're feeling that air, and it definitely has a powerful influence on the climate. However, when the valley floor is saturated in fog and doesn't see the light of day until noon or later sometimes, we have the elevation on our sides, so we're cooler because we're higher. But we've also had the sunlight from 7 a.m. until noon. So we've got that extra sunlight, which is works to our advantage on Howell Mountain. And then on the other side of the mountain, so if you kind of go up and over the crest of Howell Mountain and down the north side, you end up that much further away and that much more protected from the fog layer. And you get more weather influence from the interior, kind of what we Pope Valley. And so it's warmer nights, warmer daytime temperatures, and a little more accelerated ripening patterns. So we have vineyards on both sides of Howell Mountain, which is pretty awesome. We get to work with two very different sites that are really only 4 miles apart as the crow flies. All of Howell Mountain is volcanic soil. There's two different types, and we get to work with both. One is this like volcanic ash. It's extremely light and fluffy and dusty, and it has very little nutrient and water holding capacity. And then the other is that real iron-rich red volcanic soil that then has a little more clay in it and will hold a little more water, and you get a little bit more of a vigorous vine with kind of oftentimes a heavier crop. So the benefits of all of those things are mountain fruit, stressed vines, small berries, and insanely concentrated, beautifully structured, age-worthy Cabernets. And the challenges are mountain fruit, is oftentimes yields are lower. So you can get on a very, very fertile ground on the valley floor, you might be able to hold 5 tons per acre of Cabernet, where up on the mountain, you're really only going to hold 2 tons per acre of Cabernet. But for winemaking, it's better. For business economics, maybe not. So it's we feel very fortunate to have those 10 acres that we have. Howell Mountain vineyards are extremely sought after and really special ground for sure.
Yeah. So then you mentioned it earlier. You guys recently picked up 80 acres in Oak Knoll. So I have a question about that. First, I want to know what are some of the differences between the fruit that you get from that site versus the Howell Mountain site? And was this a vineyard you guys were sourcing fruit from before it was purchased, or was this new to you guys?
So we were sourcing a lot of fruit from the Oak Knoll district, but not from this exact site. Our Chardonnay, Viognier, and Sauvignon Blanc were literally coming from a block or two around the corner. So it was definitely an AVA in an area and a kind of a fruit style that we were very accustomed to working with. We were so fortunate that this vineyard that we purchased was bare ground when we started. So to find kind of a clean slate to plant your own vineyard is a really amazing opportunity. So instead of inheriting a 40 acres of already planted Cabernet, we were able to take those 40 acres and design a vineyard exactly to our wine portfolio and the things that we knew would grow well in this AVA that suited our needs. So we have on that property now we have 10 different varietals. We have Sauvignon Blanc, Viognier, and Chardonnay for whites. And then for reds, we have the 5 Bordeaux varietals plus Petit Syrah and Zinfandel. So we have a huge, diverse, grape source there. And that's why we chose that AVA, because the Oak Knoll district is, still is far enough up valley that it gets warm and we can ripen Cabernet, but it's also not, it's like up in Calistoga, you might not necessarily want to plant Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. But in the Oak Knoll district, you can kind of, it's in that position in the valley where you can cross many different, crossover of many different varietals, which has been perfect for our wine portfolio. I would say the Cabernet is definitely different than on Howell Mountain. The ripening pattern is different. I think that on Howell Mountain, we of course have elevation on our side, and we get a huge diurnal shift up, swing up there, and of course the berry size and the vine vigor is probably the most differentiating factor. Down on the valley floor, we have really deep, fertile soils on the site that we're in. And we can grow a pretty big grapevine that has a lot of wood, a lot of leaves, and can hang a bigger crop. As a result, we get a lot of hang time. So I'm finding actually that I harvest the grapes in Oak Knoll even later than on Howell Mountain, which was not what I was expecting when I first started farming this property. And as a result, I have kind of this long growing season where I can really make a lot of winemaking decisions. I'm not just waiting for one point in time at which the grapes are ripe and ready. It's like there's a little more flexibility in decision making and style from that site. So I can, like, for example, we're making a low alcohol cab that is new to our portfolio that is so delicious. And I picked the grapes, below 23 bricks, and it's going to be about a 12.5, 13% alcohol wine. And it's beautiful. But I can also, and that's an example of picking the grapes on the earlier side. And then I can also choose to leave them and stylistically really make a wine that is big and concentrated and lush and ripe, a little more representative of what we're doing up on Howell Mountain. So I feel like there's a lot of flexibility and winemaker influence and input in this AVA that I'm really appreciating and getting to know and love.
So I want to talk about this growing season for just a second. So it's been uncharacteristically wet, and there was snow and all that other stuff. And so for you, has that had any impact, or will that have any impact like on this growing season and maybe any of them going forward?
We needed a wet year, and we certainly got one. I would say that, let's just talk about the snow. The snow was an unusual event. I think it happened in the 80s. It was well before my time here, but people were talking about it. We literally had a foot of snow up on Howell Mountain. I have pictures of colleagues and coworkers skiing down the vine rows, and
wow.
The vines at that point were dormant, so there was no impact on the growing season, other than the fact that it made a complete mess up on Howell Mountain because all of the tree limbs fell down. So, it was, power was out, roads were closed for quite some time, and it was just kind of a weather mess. But there was no real long-term impact. Snow has it doesn't alter the vines in any way because there's no green growth on the vines at the time. And really it's just more water, which is great. As far as the volume of rain that we had, it was deep saturated soils all winter long. The rain thankfully came pretty consistently throughout the season. In past years where we've had, significant or average rainfall, but it came only in, like last year, the year before, it came only in sort of October, November, and then we were dry all through the middle of the year, and then we had a wet April. That kind of rainfall is not as helpful to us. This rainfall was consistent, and I do feel like we had such deep saturations of the soil, and that's really going to work to our benefit moving forward. Reservoirs are full, and we had some flooding, but it wasn't, it was more just pooling of water. It was a reminder that soils are saturated. We didn't have a lot of overflow of banks. So I think it's going to be a great thing. And for this season, it just means that the vineyards were a little wet in the spring, so it was a little tougher to get in there with the tractors in the early parts. We're dry now, but so maybe we were delayed a little bit because of that. And what we'll see is a lot of rapid shoot growth as we get our warmer temperatures now, which sometimes makes it a little hard to keep up in the vineyard this time of year with suckering and shoot thinning and leafing. But it's nothing that we can't handle, and I think we're all just pretty happy to have, not have another drought year.
So, if you had to explain to us your winemaking style or philosophy, how would you explain that to everybody?
Sure. Well, I think it definitely needs to be classified white versus red. So, for white wines, I really appreciate very fruit-forward, acid-driven, food-friendly whites. I like them to be clean and clear and crisp and fruity. And so I think that our customers have grown to love that and expect that from my white wines. Rosé is a great example. It just jumps out of the glass. It's so fruit-driven, has lots of fresh, natural acidity, not a huge amount of oak component in any of our white wines. We do make a Chardonnay that make two Chardonnays. One is completely unoaked and made in stainless steel drums, and the other I use about 30% new oak, and that's about the oakiest of whites that we make. And food friendliness is a really important piece of what I do. All of our wines are served with food when they're presented here at our hospitality centers. We have a tasting room on the main street in St. Helena. That's where the Bruschetteria truck is parked. And so that's lively and fun, lots of energy, lots of people coming in and out, whether they're sitting down for a food and wine pairing or they're having lunch on the patio with a bottle of wine. And then in the back part of our property, adjacent to a bordering vineyard, we have what we call the Enoteca Tasting Salon. And that is a more private one-on-one tasting experience that also is paired with food. So that's really important, making sure that they're food-friendly whites. On the red winemaking side, I'm doing so much, so many different varietals that it kind of shifts with each wine. For our Cabernet program, it's really about this being site specific. So making sure that I'm harvesting these grapes kind of at their peak ripeness for that AVA. What can I do to make them the most approachable? I have to be really careful of tannin management on Howell Mountain. So making sure that those ferments, I'm paying close attention to extraction. And then we also make we make a Grenache from Sonoma Valley. So for that, it's really more about the fruit and the site and the flavor profile. Not a lot of oak influence on that wine. So I would say that I'm really paying close attention to where these wines are coming from, what the ultimate goal is in consuming them. Do we want them to sit down and age for 5 or 10 years before we pull them out of our cellar and enjoy them? That's often the case with the Howell Mountain Cabs. Or are they drink now, fruit forward wines like the Grenache? So I try to take good care in making decisions on style for each individual wine program, and what we want from that and what our customers are expecting.
So do you have any winemaking mentors or anybody that, that really helps shape how you do things or the way you look at things?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think my time at Fisher was definitely Whitney Fisher and Mia Klein were great mentors for me. Mia definitely taught kind of a realistic perspective and approach to winemaking and patience, and that sometimes the best decision to make is to do nothing at all. I mean, to really kind of sit back and look at things from a distance. And I think that concept really is powerful in many different parts of the wine making process, whether it's harvest or blending. We did a lot of that in, blending, kind of take a step back. Let's look at what we have. Let's put some ideas together, then come back and visit. So she was a wonderful mentor for me, as was Whitney, as part of kind of a leader in a family business and a female winemaker. And I had some really great lessons learned there that I took away and kind of use with me all the time now.
So I want to talk about a couple of the wines now specifically. And you mentioned this first one a second ago, the Grenache. Now, I don't see a lot of that. At least I haven't seen a lot of Grenache being made. So let's talk about that one. So talk about the Grenache and, how it's made and, what would be a good pairing maybe with some of the Clif family food that you guys make? What would go well with the Grenache?
Sure. Yeah, so the Grenache, we don't make a Pinot Noir, and so we always talk about our Grenache as kind of the Pinot Noir of our house. I source these grapes from a vineyard in Sonoma Valley, and the owner of the vineyard is a gentleman named Phil Katuri, and he is such a cool, amazing organic farmer, both in Napa and Sonoma, and he really stands behind organic farming. He in fact will not farm a conventionally farmed vineyard. It must be organic for him to consult for. And so it's right on Highway 12 in Kenwood, and it's an all Rhone site. So both red and white, all Rhone varietals. And this is a wine where I try not to do too much. When you talk about a wine that's really made in the vineyard, this is one of them, where there's not a lot of outside influence. I just try to maintain. So I bring the fruit in. It's one of the last things that I pick each year, actually. It comes in very late. And I do a cooler ferment on this, which for me is about 84 to 85 degrees. And then just gentle pump overs twice a day. I don't want to over extract. I think with a wine like this, it's more about the fruit characteristics and not so much about a heavyweight tannin on your palate. I don't want this to be too dry of a wine. So about 2 pump overs a day. No extended maceration, so I'm not sitting on the skins for very long. It's usually about 14 days, and then pressing off, and then going 100% to neutral barrels, so no new oak whatsoever. Because it's a lighter red wine, it has, not a lot of color and not a lot of tannin. I have to be very careful of it. And this is true of making Pinot Noir as well, where you just have to handle the wine a little more delicately than you would a Cabernet that has a little more substance to it to protect it from oxidation. So we don't do a lot of racking. It usually comes out of barrel just twice during the life of the wine. It ages for about 15 months and then straight to bottle. And it tends to be mostly fruit forward. It can have some earthy characteristics to it, medium weight tannins on the palate. And just a beautiful, beautiful wine that I like to drink mostly on the younger side, not one that I really think needs a ton of age to it. As far as food pairings go, I would say, any kind of sort of when you're talking about fat content of food, kind of medium fat content. So like a grilled chicken with some kind of nice cheese, like a grilled chicken salad with some cheese. Or we have a whole portfolio of nut mixes. So, as part of our program here at Clif Family, we have a full-time executive chef and an amazing culinary program that not only kind of works in tandem with our farm to run the food truck, but also we make nut mixes, chocolates, jams, hot sauces. We make a whole portfolio of pantry items. And so we have these nut mixes, and we have a smoked pimenton almonds, and that's a great pairing with the Grenache because it's a little bit spicy, delicious, and has a smokiness to it that can really complement the wine.
So the next wine is the Viognier. So you mentioned earlier the type of whites that you like, and I think this one fits the profile of what you were talking about earlier. So just tell us a little bit about that and a good food pairing that would go well with this Viognier.
Sure. So the Viognier is another Rhone example. So we had been purchasing these grapes for a long time, and we lost our fruit source. So there was a little gap in our Viognier production. I think I didn't make any in 19 and 20. And then in 21, we're thrilled to have kind of our first crop off of our new vineyard. So now we have estate grown Viognier, and we know our supply is stable. So we're really thrilled with that. People love Viognier. It's such a different aromatic. And the style that Viognier can be made in two very different styles, kind of the more underripe style where it's a little more fruit forward, higher acidity. I always use Asian pear as a descriptor for Viognier. It's definitely distinct. It doesn't, you can clearly identify it. And it's so uniquely different than what we're used to drinking from Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. So the other end of the spectrum as far as style goes is to let it get really, really ripe. It can get really golden. It has pretty thick skins, and they get really, really golden, and then it can be more viscous and a little like almost oily, much higher alcohol percentage, much more golden in color, the finished product. So for me, I like to pick it on the earlier side. And again, we're trying to maintain fresh acidity. We're trying to make it very food friendly. But for me, when I'm thinking about wine pairings for Viognier, and we talk about wine pairings all the time here at Clif Family. So we talk about a contrast wine pairing and a comparative wine pairing. So where you would take a wine that kind of tastes or smells similar to the food product, that would be comparative. But for Viognier, I really think the contrast wine pairings are a lot more powerful. So because it's kind of this beautiful fruit-driven, acid-driven wine that's fresh and crisp, I like to pair it with something a little creamier, like a triple cream cheese is an amazing pairing with the Viognier. So they really come together and are amazing complements to one another.
So the next wine I want to ask you about is the Gary's Improv Zinfandel. So I'm a big Zinfandel fan, so I love Zinfandel. And so I'm assuming it's named after Gary, the founder, the owner there. And so what's the story behind this? And tell us about this wine.
Sure. So we've been making Gary's Improv for a long time. And a couple of side stories. The first is that Gary loves Zinfandel. It's like just a wine that he loves to drink. And so we actually have Zinfandel planted right at their home property on Howe Mountain. It's technically below the Howe Mountain AVA line, so when it's labeled, it's classified as Napa Valley, but it is on Howe Mountain. Okay. And then the improv piece comes from the idea that Gary is one of those guys where he's just amazing at everything he does. He's extremely talented. And so he plays the trumpet, and he can play improvisational trumpet. And the rumor is that he can play two trumpets at the same time. So back in the day, Clif Bar always had a company band. And so they would come to our winery, and we would set up a stage in the parking lot outside of our tasting room. And we would have our summer solstice concert where the Clif Bar band would play and Gary would get up and play his trumpet. And that's kind of like the story of Gary's Improv. That's kind of what
Wow.
Yeah. So these wines have always been kind of riper, bigger, more concentrated Zinfandels, not a lighter style. So always deep red in color, really not necessarily over the top jammy, but big, and they have a significant amount of color, a significant amount of tannin, and a lot of fruit to support it. So always a staff favorite around here.
The Zinfandel?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, so you guys were generous enough to send me this Kit's Killer Cab, and so I think the story about it is cool, and I like the just from what I've seen about it, and I've been drinking it, and it's awesome. So talk about that one, the Kit's Killer Cab.
So we consider these two, the Gary's Improv and the Kit's Killer Cab, our flagship wines. They bear our owner's name, and definitely two of our most sought after SKUs. And Kit's Killer Cab is always a Cabernet based wine, and it depends on the vintage, but it comes from various locations. Some years we're pulling a little bit off of Howe Mountain, but most years it's coming from our Oak Knoll vineyard, and it's meant to be a Cabernet that's approachable. We want to over deliver for the value. This is $75 a bottle, which is a pretty fair price for a Napa Valley Cabernet. And so we want to make it something that we can drink at a younger age, not necessarily, all of these wines can be cellared and can be aged for many years, but we also want this particular wine to be very approachable and drinkable at a younger age. And I also sometimes use a little bit of Petit Syrah as a blender in this wine. It wouldn't say that on the label, but if you were at our tasting room, we might talk about that a little bit. And that kind of gives it just a little bit more of a boost, color, richness, mid-palate, a little bit more fruit forward. And this is a wine that we, make a pretty decent amount of. So it's a little more widely available, which is always nice. Our Howe Mountain cabs are such small vineyards that we can sell out of those fairly quickly. So this one is a little bit more accessible.
Yeah. Well, it's excellent. I've loved it. So I appreciate it very much. So I want to ask you about one more wine here, and it's called the SEMA, I believe. SEMA Cabernet Sauvignon. I guess that's the best of the best that you guys make. At least that's how it's presented on the website. So tell me about that one and what's unique and how that one's made.
Sure. So we pronounce it Cima, which is an Italian word for kind of the pinnacle or the summit. And a lot of our wine names come from Gary and Kit's travels in Italy, as I was talking about before. And this is a word that they use a lot. They call it La Gran Cima, which is kind of the top of the summit of the ride, or if they're cycling on a mountain pass and they get to La Gran Cima. And so this particular wine is a Howell Mountain Cab from our estates, but it's a blend of the two vineyards. So we'll do the two vineyards are called Cold Springs and Croquet. And we'll do single vineyard bottlings from both places. But this Cima blend is a little bit from both. And typically what I'll do is around this time, actually, after harvest, I will sit down and taste all of the Cabernets from Howell Mountain. And I typically have 3 picks from Cold Springs and 2 picks from Croquet. And then I might have a new barrel component and a used barrel component from some of those lots. So I have a lot of different lots to work with, and I'll taste each wine individually and decide how I'm going to bring them together. So if there's an absolute standalone wine, oftentimes that wine is best suited for the single vineyard expression and bottling. And then sometimes I'll just, and this is a lot of just trial and error, where I'm literally kind of pouring little bits of wine into each glass and tasting, well, what does that do? And deciding and thinking about what it's missing, and then looking at my other lots and trying to decide what might fill the gap. So the Cima blend and blended wines are different than single vineyard expressions in that I can often really play around with these wines and decide what it's missing and the missing pieces, and create exactly what I'm looking for. It's an amazing process to taste through and blend and put a wine together. And it's definitely multi-stepped. So I'll put together a base blend of Cab and then let it age for 6 months. Maybe harvest comes and you kind of put it together right before harvest. And then when harvest is over, revisit those previous vintage wines. And then what is it missing now? It's had some time to come together in barrel. Maybe it needs a little more new oak. Maybe it needs a little bit of a blender of something else. So it's definitely a process, very long, takes a lot of patience, and a lot of time and a lot of tasting, which is work, which is funny to some people. But this is kind of the pinnacle wine of our portfolio, highest price point, and one that definitely deserves some aging in the cellar.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I've got a couple more. We're getting to the end here, and I got a couple more questions for you that I kind of saved to the end. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, is there a varietal or a vineyard site that you've never worked with that you'd be interested, or that you want, well, I'd really like to make some wine from this, or I'd like to make this variety of wine? Is there anything like that for you?
I get my hands in this a little bit, but I love working with really cold climate Syrah. So it's just fun. It has a really interesting aromatic profile that's really distinctive. And I love it. It's like really can be very, very black peppery and meaty and almost like cured meats, and really funky and delicious. We make a wine called Beachy, which is part of our adventure series. And that is a Syrah Grenache blend. So I do get my hands on a little bit of cooler climate Syrah that comes from Carneros. But I would love to dive deeper into like a Sonoma Coast Syrah. I just think it would be crazy and great, delicious. And low alcohol. I love the low alcohol component of that too, which is kind of a movement which I think is kind of gearing up, and a lot of people producing wines that are lower in alcohol.
Yeah. So the last question I have for you then is, what are your thoughts on, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, but what are your thoughts on the state of the wine industry as it is right now? Is all the conversation that we hear about younger people aren't getting into wine and all that stuff, is that all real? And is there anything that wineries can do about
it? I think that there are so many people out there that are still drinking wine as Napa Valley Cab and all of the wines that we're making, whether they're young or old. We see a huge range of people come through our tasting room here, and and it can be a casual group of cyclists that are just finishing their ride and having a tasting, or it can be, a wine collector back in the Enoteca. Or yesterday, there was a group of women here from Florida celebrating a 30th birthday party. We see them all, and you cannot frame your expectations on who's drinking what and who likes what and who's going to buy what. It surprises us every day. So I think that people want to come visit the Napa Valley. It's a beautiful place. It's a wonderful place to spend a few days. And the activity of winemaking is so fun. I mean, you can have such a great weekend with food and wine, and people are going to continue to want to visit us here. And then getting people in the door is really the greatest, the most important step of the process to selling wine and getting your product out there. And so once you get the people here, we have so many fun tools and things to talk about. And I visit with guests in our Enoteca pretty regularly. And people love to talk about wine and taste wine and pair it with food. And then once they go through that experience, it's really fun to bring some home. So I think what we're doing here is super promising for me and really exciting. And there's a lot of great things happening in the wine business, and people are doing unique things in the vineyard and in how they're putting wines together and bottling them. And I think it's really exciting, and I'm excited for what's to come.
Well, I have to say, Laura, you exceeded expectations, so I really appreciate it. You have been awesome, and I learned so much, which is exactly why I do this, because I love learning about, how different wines are made and everything. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and happy Mother's Day to you and all the moms out there. Have a great weekend, and I appreciate it, and I can't wait to come down to Clif Family one of these days and maybe meet you.
Please do. We would love to have you. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, for the great conversation.
Love it. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.